الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this webinar organized by the Counseling Psychology Program at the College of Islamic Studies, Hamad bin Khalifa University. Subhanallah, we are living in tough times, in a time when many people around the world are carrying a lot emotionally and psychologically with the conflicts around us and the war situations that many of us are witnessing almost every day. It is natural for people to feel anxious. It is natural for people to feel distressed and even sometimes overwhelmed. These events affect not only those who are directly involved, but also many of us who are watching and processing them from afar, who are constantly looking at the updates on the news channels and social media. So that is why conversations like this one are so important. We need spaces where we can reflect on how to deal with these emotions in healthy ways, in psychological ways, drawing both from psychological understanding and from the spiritual resources of our tradition, our athar. It is really a privilege for me to moderate today's session, especially because I've had the opportunity to study under both our speakers, alhamdulillah, and I can genuinely say that they have been phenomenal teachers, and many of us in the program have benefited tremendously from their knowledge and from their mentorship, alhamdulillah, and the way they help us think deeply about the intersection of psychology and faith. Our first speaker today is Dr. Fahad Habib Khan. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome, Doctor. Dr. Fahad is the assistant professor at the College of Islamic Studies here at Hamad bin Khalifa University. And Dr. Fahad's work often explores how Islamic intellectual traditions can meaningfully engage with contemporary psychological questions. And his teaching encourages students to think very critically about how faith and psychology can speak to real human struggles. Our second speaker is Dr. Hooman Keshavarzi, the program director of MA in Counseling Psychology program at the College of Islamic Studies. Dr. Hooman is widely known for his work in TIIP, Islamically integrated psychotherapy, and he has played a major role in developing approaches that bring together classical Islamic understandings of the self with modern psychological practice. Both of them have contributed immensely to the growing field of Islamic psychology, and it is truly a privilege to learn from them. And inshallah, today we're going to benefit from them a lot, inshallah. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Fahad Habib Khan to begin our session. The mic is all yours, Doctor. Thank you all once again for joining us. Ahlan wa sahlan.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this program. I think in times like this, having some basic knowledge and understanding of these issues and how to deal with the human emotions, which, as we'll talk about, are very natural and normal, is something that is very beneficial. So I will try to keep this relevant, and I just want to stress the importance of what's happening right now and why in certain cases, in many cases, it might be important to seek professional assistance whenever and wherever possible. So this webinar is not meant to substitute professional therapy. In some people, a situation like what's happening right now can trigger previous issues that were, just kind of tucked away as what we humans sometimes do in order to deal with our difficulties and stress. We just kind of put it to the side and pretend it doesn't exist. So in those situations, we definitely have to be mindful. And I want to approach anxiety and stress in a way that is much broader and than a more of a clinical model. Because nowadays, whenever we hear stress, whenever we hear the word anxiety, we think of clinical medical terminology. We think that this is a diagnosis, and that someone who's experiencing stress is experiencing anxiety is sick, is ill. And I want to kind of dismantle that today a little bit as well, because there is clinical anxiety. I mean, there is something that is psychological disorder. No, don't get me wrong, but whether we have that or not is something we need to figure out and perhaps have someone, a professional, figure out for us sometimes as well. In these times, what we're experiencing right now, distress is not just about symptoms. It's about what it means to be a human, to live in uncertainty, to seek stability in a world that is fundamentally at its core unstable. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. My goal is really to help us think about anxiety psychologically, spiritually, and then hopefully translate that into something that is more practical, inshallah, by the end of it. So by the end of the session, hopefully we'll be able to distinguish stress, fear, and anxiety. We'll be able to understand why anxiety has psychological and spiritual roots, recognize how uncertainty can intensify distress and anxiety, apply practical strategies, and then identify when professional help is needed. So there's 5 objectives that we want to get through, inshallah, today for sure, by the end. So now just to start us off, anxiety is more than a symptom cluster. Like if you open up what we psychologists and psychiatrists use as what's called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, what we have in it are symptoms. And if an individual has a set of symptoms, then they're diagnosed with a disorder. But anxiety, broadly speaking, is beyond that. Right? It's not always reducible to a diagnosis. It can be a response to uncertainty, a feature of human creaturely existence, right? What I mean by that is that by our very nature, there's a famous poet philosopher, Allama Muhammad Iqbal, from the Indian subcontinent, died in 1938. And one of his line of poetry is very beautiful that I really love, and he says that this idea of stillness and calmness is an illusion of our mind, because every atom in this universe is in constant motion. Every atom has anxiety. If you look at the things at a subatomic or atomic level, you see that the electrons are constantly in motion. So if everything is in motion, the water is in motion, for example, even if the water is still, it looks like it's still, but at the atomic level, it's in motion. Our body's in constant motion. Our blood is constantly pumping through our body. Our brain, even when we're sleeping, brain waves are still in motion. So the idea of like stillness is an illusion, because we, at our core existence, are, I mean, for the lack of better words, I'm going to say anxious individuals. Anxiety is also sometimes a sign or signal of vulnerability, and at times a sign of spiritual dislocation. And we'll talk about that as well. Although I don't want to confuse the two, but it's good sometimes when we experience anxiety, because it helps ground us, especially for those of us, most of us who are joining this, into our belief system. This matters because if we call anxiety as pathology, we understand the person, and at the same time, if we spiritualize everything and ignore the psychology, then we misunderstand the person. So we need something that is more integrated, that integrates the psychological aspect as well as the spiritual aspect and the existential aspect of it as well, inshallah. Okay, so why does it have a spiritual basis, right? I want to start with a spiritual proposition here. For like, anxiety has a spiritual basis because human being is created with a longing for what is ultimate, enduring, and real. A longing to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of the Sufi scholars will say that the fact that we're separated from the divine, the fact that we are not in our rightful place in Jannah, for example, the fact that oftentimes this dunya takes away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the reason why we feel this anxiety. Okay, and I agree with that. When our heart is not anchored in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or when that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is obscured, the person becomes more vulnerable to unrest. We find, or so we will place our dependence on unstable things like circumstances, status, power, control, people, institutions. But these things can't bear the weight of the ultimate reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The way that we rely on Allah, who is should be sufficient for us. When we say Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, that He is sufficient for us. The way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is ala kulli shayin qadir, who has power over everything. La hawla, when you say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, no one has authority or power except Allah. And then we try to give power to these other aspects. That tends to be also the source of some of that uncertainty as well. And these things can't bear the ultimate weight of this relationship. This can only this not only will produce sadness but also anxiety. In that sense, anxiety may at times reflect not just fear of events but estrangement from the deepest source of security, which is our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so why is anxiety part of human existence? There's an existential dimension, right? I mentioned this before. We live in a temporal world, right? This world is temporary. كل شيء هالك إلا وجهه, or كل من عليها فان. Everything is going to come to an end eventually one day. As I mentioned earlier, everything in creation is in motion. Everything changes. Our bodies age, right? No matter how much we try to, reverse this process or do things to our bodies, bodies naturally will age. Societies become unstable. We see, especially now, we see some of the biggest superpowers in the world are becoming unstable because of political tensions. Plans collapse, relationships transform. I mean, like marriage relationship, for example, starts out really nice, then it gets very rocky, then it becomes even better. So relationship between parents and children transform naturally. They don't remain stable. They don't remain the same. And security also remains partial, no matter how secure one feels, especially in this time. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be secure. And we thank those who are securing us, our government, our army, who's making sure that we can feel security while they're putting their lives in danger. But at the end of the day, this security is still going to be partial. Anxiety is not foreign to human existence. It's part of it. It's built into this experience of living in a contingent and ever-changing world. Now, that doesn't mean anxiety is always good or should be romanticized. I don't want to take that away from us. I don't want to take that message, home from this presentation, because, like I said before, sometimes it is clinical, and for some people, it can be very damaging. But it also means that we shouldn't be surprised by it, that we should expect it, that we should welcome it, because it's part of our existence. And the more honest question is not why anxiety exists, but how to live wisely and faithfully in the presence of anxiety. That's something that we need to be very mindful, and the question that we need to ask. Okay, so now the terms that you sometimes hear at a psychological level, especially, we have terms like stress, fear, and anxiety, right? Now, it helps to distinguish what these terms are. So stress is you can say the body-mind response to pressure or demand, right? I mean, most of you can relate to what stress is. Like when things get a little bit rough, when the job gets a little bit rough, when someone's having financial issues, there's stress on the individual. In a time like this, where there's crisis, there's political crisis, countries are being attacked, stress obviously goes up. Fear is a natural human response to an immediate threat, right? And it's usually directed towards some kind of a threat. And anxiety, broadly speaking, is there's some for most people because of more future-related aspects. So it's more anticipatory. It's often about what may happen and what could go wrong, or what cannot yet be controlled or known. Notice the terminology I'm using here, right? What may happen, what could go wrong. That's what makes us anxious most of the time. In unsettling times like right now, all three are usually overlapping, if you think about this, right? For example, if you're living in a Gulf country, in Qatar, you will have fear. Okay, fear related to what? Well, there's like missiles that are being fired on the country, and they're being blown up in the air. There's loud sounds that hear. So the fear is very direct. It's related to something. It's not just random fear of something might happen. Okay, there's stress because people obviously not sure how to engage in their work activities. Schools have gone online. People sometimes are afraid to leave their house for even things that they need, right? Utilities, groceries, things like that. And then there's obviously anxiety about uncertainty about the future. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when this is And we hope for the best, and again, Allah bless those who are trying to protect us and bring peace to this dunya, and may Allah harm those who are trying to cause more anxiety and more dhulm in this world. I mean, but we don't know what's going to happen. So all of this is happening at the same time with all of us, with most of us in this unsettling time. And so people are under real stress. They're afraid of like actual concrete dangers, and also anxious about possible futures, or not knowing what the future holds. So why does this time intensify anxiety, as I mentioned? It has a multiplying factor on anxiety. Unpredictability will destabilize us because the mind prefers what? Coherence and control, right? We prefer to have everything. We prefer to know like what's going to happen next. And when something happens and it's unpredictable, that increases our anxiety. Not to mention, right now, there's information overload. Our nervous system is not meant to be activated all the time. Our nervous system generally has two, you can say it's like a scale, right? It has two sides. One side is what we call rest and digest. The other side is what we call fight or flight. So sometimes it is important. Now, I just want to mention something, right? Like speaking of anxiety and stress, for example, as I'm presenting right now, my body's experiencing some level of stress. It's experiencing some level of anxiety, which is good, which is healthy, because this is what's making sure that I'm mindful of what I say, that I'm able to communicate well, that I'm on my toes. If this anxiety and stress wasn't there, then I would be more prone to mistakes, right? So that's normal for my body to have. But if I keep putting myself in situations voluntarily, volitionally, that is going to intensify my anxiety. That's unhealthy, right? So right now, because of, there's people who are in some of the countries who are trying to leave countries. There are people who are trying to find out, what's that loud noise? Sometimes people, if you go online and see people say, I heard a loud bang. I don't know what that is. They're trying to understand what that sound is. Some kind of a warning comes on your phone, and you would start to worry. You go online and start checking the news. Is it ending? Is it not ending? What did that person say? What did that leader say? Who's dead? Who's alive? That type of information overload can make things worse for us, right? Repeated exposures to news, rumors, images, commentary can make the body feel like danger is constant. Okay, and um, uh, social media is designed that way. Just want to, as a side note, is very important. Social media algorithm is meant to give us that information that we have been looking. So if our interest has been wanting to know more about the war, then when you go on Instagram and you start scrolling, it's going to give you more and more posts about that. So that information overload almost becomes natural, and you can't avoid it even if you wanted to. You might say, I'm opening up YouTube just to look at funny reels, but guess what? Your YouTube account knows, and your phone knows that you've been looking at videos of the war or news. So it's going to want to give you more of that because it thinks that that's what's going to keep you engaged in that. Then loss of control will increase helplessness, right? Because we feel like we're not in control. I mean, things are happening to us. I mean, at any point, we feel like some missile can come down and destroy our house, or destroy our property, or destroy our life. So that loss of control is also creating more helplessness. Then we have disrupted routines, right? I mean, just naturally, when we're trying to get into routine, what happens? Someone comes, some warning comes on the phone. All of a sudden, you have to put everything away. My son was having a class, for example, and then some of these missiles were being intercepted. So the teacher said, okay, well, hold on, everyone, go back to your parents right now. I'm going to go to my children. We'll take a break. Right, your routine is getting interrupted. Some people who would go to the masjid, for example, to pray salah, now they're not leaving the house because you're getting these warnings to shelter in place. That also reduces regulation. And emotions are socially contagious, right? So when you're anxious, your spouse is anxious. If they're anxious, then you become more anxious. If your children are anxious, you pick up on that anxiety. If you look at your neighbor, they're afraid. If you talk to people on social media and Instagram or on WhatsApp, you see messages. All that increases your anxiety, and it spreads through families and communities and the media ecosystem as well. So this is kind of like a cycle of anxiety, for the lack of better words, right? It helps to understand what this is. Um, is something uncertain occurs, right? Something that is not in our control, the mind will interpret naturally as a threat, especially if it's something like a loud noise, for example, right? Our body is attuned, is designed to interpret very loud noise as a threat. The body becomes aroused, right? I talked about this before. It's a very natural thing, your body to have that kind of physiological or psychological arousal. And then the person will begin to interpret bodily and situational signals in a catastrophical way. There's a theory that talks about how it's not really the noise that makes us anxious, rather it's our interpretation of the noise. Now, there's oftentimes different theories in psychology, as you may not know, but one theory will say, no, it's the noise itself that produces the emotion. The other one says, no, it's the noise and what the interpretation that you make of it, right? Which is the noise, which produces the emotion. So, for example, if there's fireworks happening on a national day or in some kind of celebration, some football game, then your body knows that that's celebration, so it won't produce that fear. But some people say, no, it actually will produce that fear, and your mind will try to curb that. And then we engage in anxious behaviors, right? In oftentimes trying to compensate, trying to overcome the anxiety, trying to, find shelter, trying to figure out what's happening, try to, look at the news. And these compulsive checking, reassurance seeking, sometimes avoidance. So we try to avoid, and pretend that something exists. And then withdrawal or irritability. And they give you a temporary relief. They give you some relief. I mean, there's truth to it, but it's only temporary. It's not permanent. It's not something that you can rely on. And that then leads to going back to completing this cycle and starting from all over again, because the relief is temporary, right? And one of the core tasks in treatment and in self-management is to interrupt the cycle, right? We want to break the cycle, and wherever we can. In some places we have some control over it. In some other places we don't have much control over it. The most of the control that we have over is in the realm of the anxious behaviors, in the behaviors. Once we can control the behaviors, then we have some level of controlling this anxious cycle. And as I mentioned before, not all anxiety is disordered, right? In some cases, it's not pathology. We don't want to pathologize every form of anxiety either. Some anxiety is proportionate to the real instability, to the real threat, right? Like I said before, if there's loud noises coming, if you know missiles are being intercepted, you will experience anxiety. Some people take that and think, "Oh my God, I have a problem. I'm too anxious." No, that's very normal. If you don't experience that, I would, as a psychologist, say there's something wrong with you, right? If there's explosions around you and you're just kind of pretending nothing is happening and you're not having a response to it, even a little bit, then I would say there's some problem with you, because that's abnormal. Unless you're some very, mashallah, wali of Allah who's able to manage and who's accepted death at every moment in our life. This, for most of us, 99% of us, we have a normal reaction to it. Some may even awaken some moral seriousness or spiritual reflection. Some anxiety is meant to do that. Right? It makes you reflect the reality of life, the temporary aspect of this dunya, the fact that things are not in our control. That's a healthy thing. That's a good thing. Anxiety can also at times signal something important requires attention, whether it's internally or externally, right? So broadly speaking, that's also a good thing. And the issue is not whether anxiety exists, but whether it becomes excessive, whether it becomes impairing, or for the lack of better words, disorganized. It makes us disorganized into our lives. That's what anxiety can be, pathological. When is it clinically significant, right? So we're talking about like normal anxiety into pathological, into now it's like, okay, this is a clinical level, and this is something that you need to maybe seek professional help, or requires professional help. It's important that for that to happen, anxiety has to be persistent. It has to be there a lot or most of the time. It has to be disproportionate to the threat. It has to be functionally impairing, like someone who cannot eat, someone who cannot sleep, someone who can't leave their house, someone who cannot pray, someone who cannot engage with other people. That's causing impairments in their functioning. If anxiety causes panic, or like I said, you can't sleep at all now, severe insomnia. Now, for example, most people, when they have sleeping issues, it's oftentimes related to anxiety. But most people are able to deal with that anxiety and overcome that and go to sleep. But if you can't fall asleep because you keep worrying that your phone is going to go off with another critical alert, and now you're only able to sleep a few hours rather than having your 6 to 8 hours that you normally need, then that would be problematic, clinically significant. If the anxiety leads to avoidance or breakdown in relationships, like I mentioned, and if it's accompanied by hopelessness or self-harming thoughts, that's something that we need to take care of immediately. This is why anxiety is oftentimes tied to depression and vice versa, because all this anxious behaviors, all this happening in our lives can lead to hopelessness, can lead to this idea that things are never going to get any better. My life's not going to improve. Or I am so powerless. I can't do anything to protect myself or my family. That kind of a thought or feeling can lead to hopelessness. So what does our Islamic spiritual tradition offers? MashaAllah, we have a very rich Islamic tradition. In our Islamic psychology program, the work that we do is to integrate our Islamic tradition into the current psychological practice, because the current psychology that I mentioned before, the over pathological aspect of it, everyone is, or oversimplified aspect, reduced reductionism, and the scientism, it creates this very unhealthy way of interpreting a human existence. So we go back to our tradition and ask, what can we do? There's some very key important aspects. Obviously, the first and most important is tawakkul, right? Our tradition, by the way, just to before we go into tawakkul, it doesn't promise emotional invulnerability. It doesn't say that you're going to be, at peace. It doesn't say that you're going to be happy all the time, right? The most tested people in the world are the ones that are most beloved to Allah. The prophets were the most tested individuals. They themselves experienced grief, burden, fear, hardship. So the Islamic tradition doesn't offer an elimination of distress, but rather a transformed response to it. Okay, tawakkul means that you trust with action, right? You put your trust in Allah with purposeful action. Right? You tie the camel, you put the tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sabr means displaced steadiness, not passive resignation, right? Like sabr is also a very active thing. Like it becomes passive if you engage in it regularly, but it requires you to assess the situation. Okay, what's happening right now is very difficult, and I don't have any control or authority over it. The best thing I can do is be patient with it. Maybe there's something good that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in store for me. When it said in Surah in Shurah, "Inna ma'al usri yusra," right? There's, with hardship there is always ease. It's followed by ease. So having patience through a difficult time, because there will be ease afterwards. Dhikr should restore orientation, right? And by the way, I want to specify, dhikr is not just, sometimes some individuals, some of us, after salah, we're just like subhanallah, 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 subhanallah. Like that's just dhikr, that's just repeating words. But if you want a healthy way of engaging with dhikr, that is to sit and to reflect. As I'm saying Alhamdulillah, I'm reflecting on all the different things that are in my life that I'm thankful for, that I'm grateful for, right? Even though there's some things right now that I'm not grateful for, some things that didn't exist, but there's so many things, blessings in my life that I could be grateful for. I can be grateful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me health. I can be grateful that I have my family. As we know, people in Gaza, most of them don't even have family members left. I can be grateful that I have a house, that I have some kind of a shelter, some kind of protection. I can be grateful that I have a stable government who's taking all precautions, who's doing whatever they can to protect their citizens. And all of these things. And so when I'm doing engaging in dhikr, I'm thinking about that. When I'm saying Allahu Akbar, I'm putting Allah above all of these things. I'm putting Allah above these leaders who are trying to destroy some of the people around the world who are engaging in war. All of these things are things that I'm thinking about. So that's mindful dhikr. That's more engaged dhikr. And same with dua, right? Dua is meant to create a relational turning towards Allah. That's why it's hadith says dua is the ibadah, right? It's us turning towards Allah and creating and building this relationship. So it can't be passive. It's not something you just say it. It's something that you actually feel it. And as you're saying it, you're speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. Salah is supposed to also create structure, right? That throughout the day, that when these things happen, there's loud noises. There's, even though you can't leave the house, okay, sure, you're asked to shelter in place, but you can still make salah at home. You can still do jama'ah at home with your family. That creates structure. You have a structured time when you wake up, structured time when you go to sleep. You are engaged in dunyavi aspects, in the worldly actions, and all of a sudden you have to say, you know what, I have to pause here and I have to go pray, right? So there's obviously dua that you do on your own time or any time that you want, but then there's salah which has to happen at a certain defined time. You put everything to the side, you say, I have to engage in it. That creates structure. And then finally, companionship. This is a very, very important aspect that we oftentimes ignore. Good companionship will protect against a psychological, spiritual fragmentation, and especially isolation, which can lead to depression, which gives room for shaitan to come in and put in more negative thoughts in our mind. Now, there's some things that I want to debunk, right? There's common distortions, as I would say, that people sometimes engage in. For example, someone might say, if I had faith, enough faith, I would not feel anxious. And as I mentioned earlier, anxiety is part of our life. Even the prophets experienced fear, right? And for example, even if you look at fear in itself, we have to have fear of what? Of things that are meant to be fearful. Like if I'm walking on the road and I see a bear or a lion or something that comes out of nowhere, of course I would have fear about it. I should have fear about it, right? At the very least, everyone has to have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the very core. So fear itself is not bad, right? So having fear does not mean I don't have enough faith. It's what type of fear and how I'm utilizing that fear when and if I'm experiencing it. Feeling afraid means spiritual weakness, right? That's something that we have to dismantle, because again, as I mentioned before, that it's not sign of spiritual weakness. Fear and faith are not mutually exclusive, right? They both can coexist at the same time. We also think that treating tawakkul is like passive, like just put trust in Allah and that's it. No, as the hadith says, you tie your camel and then you put Allah. You do whatever is in your power, your control, whatever you can do, whatever you can manage, whatever you're meant to do, and then things that are beyond your control, you put the trust in Allah. There's a prayer. It's called the Serenity Prayer. It's not from the Bible or anything. I think it was written by someone. I forgot who it was, but it's very beautiful. And I sometimes remind myself of it. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Because there are things in our life that we don't have any control over. We cannot change. We can't change that another country is attacking us right now. We can't change the fact that some of those missiles might get through and hit something on the ground, and some of them are going to be destroyed. Some of these things are beyond our control. Okay, we can't change that we're not allowed to go outside, for example. But there are some things that we can change. We can change how we engage with our spouse, how we engage with our children. We can change how we take care of ourselves physically, psychologically, spiritually. So it's good to differentiate that. And then after you've done whatever you can, things you can change, then you put the trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then thought that expecting spiritual practices to immediately remove distress is not something that we can expect either, right? Again, dhikr and salah is meant to strengthen our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our relationship with the distress itself. It's not meant to be an instant cure, right? When the Quran says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub," that itminan doesn't mean you don't feel anxiety. That itminan means that you're content with Allah's decree. It might mean that you're feeling anxiety, but you just have a stronger tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then a better response, which includes both a psychological and a spiritual, is something that we need to be engaged in. A psychologically informed approach will help regulate the individual. A spiritually grounded approach helps orient the person. Now, regulation without meaning can feel very hollow, and meaning without regulation can become unstable, right? So, a strong response to anxiety requires both calming the body, clarifying the mind, processing emotions, and rooting the self in remembrance, trust, and moral spiritual orientation as well, ethical grounding, surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so practically speaking, last few minutes, I'll talk about that inshallah. First thing is to calm the body. right? The first intervention, bodily. Anxiety is not just a problem with thoughts, it is an embodied state. Most people, when they experience anxiety, they're experiencing what? They're experiencing shakiness, nervousness, difficulty breathing, difficulty swallowing. There's a feeling in the throat. Their mouth is dry, for example. So your body is experiencing something. You're sweating, for example, right? So slowed breathing can be very good to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest system that I talked about earlier. So, most people when they're anxious, they're just kind of engaged in this hyperventilation, just slowing it down. If you could put dhikr into this as well, and you're remembering Allah while you're doing dhikr, that's even better. But just taking a minute to take a breath, taking a breath, holding it in, right, and then letting it out very, very slow. All these, and if you go online and you look at, deep diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing, or breathing for, breath practices for anxiety, and you will find a lot of videos, and all of them are basically talking about the same thing, which is activating the parasympathetic nervous system to slow your anxious body down a little bit. And when the body slows down, the mind also kind of tends to follow for most people. Reducing overstimulation wherever possible. This is very important. I'll come to other ones as well. Limit media, social media, limit news exposure to as much as possible. Limit caffeine. Caffeine itself, now we're fasting these days, so throughout the day we're not drinking. But some of us, we take our caffeine throughout the night, which is even healthy because then it affects our sleep, right? So limit caffeine, and this physiological activation. So uh, coming to sleep now, sleep is meant to restore our body physically and the energy that the body needs to deal with some of these threats throughout the day. So make sure we are very constant of protecting our sleep. Now, naturally in Ramadan, most of us are getting less sleep, which is fine, but still, it shouldn't be significantly less. If possible, sleep at night, right? So you engage in pray your tarawih, you sleep for a few hours, you get up before suhoor, you do qiyam, you read some Quran, you do suhoor. After suhoor, you sleep for a little bit as well. During the day, maybe do a qailula. But if you're only getting 2 to 3 hours of sleep per day, that's going to not be healthy for you, and it's going to not calm the body. And engage in some kind of physiological arousal, like a short walk can also be very healthy. Now, obviously, sometimes we can't go outside. That's understandable, but in most cases we can. And if we can't go outside, we can engage in physical exercises in our homes that also can be very healthy, to a way to calm the body. The other thing is discipline the mind, right? Ask yourself the question, what do I know? Okay, what do I not know? What is it that I'm assuming, right? A lot of times we're assuming things that don't have reality behind it. And at the end of the day, we know the reality. The only one that knows what's going to happen is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Sometimes things happen naturally. Sometimes there's intervention from Allah that changes the path, even though we think this is how things are going to be, but something comes and it just disrupts that path for us. So recognizing that things are what I'm assuming and how that's causing anxiety can help us deal with that. Part of this work is, the first thing is recognition, to be able to recognize and identify, become aware. Most of us are having thoughts, passive thoughts, and that's causing anxiety, and we don't even know what those thoughts are. This is why when you go to a psychologist, sometimes psychologists will tell you to write down things that are going through your mind, to write these thoughts down. So, ask yourself, what do I know? What I don't know? What am I assuming? What is possible versus what is probable, right? Sometimes we engage in things that could be possibly happen. I'm sitting in a building right now. It's possible that the building can come down. The building can collapse, right? It's very much possible. But that's not what we go after. We go after things that are probable. Because if we kept thinking and kept planning for things that are possible, then it would never end. Like I work as a clinical psychologist in the US for many years, and I would have clients sometimes who have anxiety. They would say, "Oh, I'm planning for the worst. I have this fund that I'm going to save money. Okay, how much money? $5,000. But what if something else happens? What if someone gets injured? Okay, now it's $10,000. But what if I lose a leg? I can't work anymore. Okay, now I need $100,000. Like, the idea of things that are possible can never end, and you cannot chase the end of that. And that's where the tawakkul part comes in. We look at probable and we leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as I said earlier, what is in our control. And this type of thing, and doing this, by the way, writing it down, and or engaging in it in a very contemplative, deliberate practice, tafakkur, as we say, right? Tadabbur, like you sit and you think about these things. You try to calm yourself mentally as well. We talked about physically, the body, and now we're talking about mentally or cognitively. Protect your heart, right? We mentioned the importance of dhikr, right? Even if it's brief but consistent. أحب الأعمال إلى الله أدومها وإن قل, as the hadith says, the most beloved of actions to Allah are those that are consistent, even if it's new, right? So some dhikr every day is better than going to a dhikr circle like once every quarter, 3-4 times a year. Some dhikr, like there's some adhkar that the Prophet ﷺ used to engage in. There's morning adhkar, there's evening adhkar. There's a book called Hisnul Muslim. You can, and this is why it's called a protection. The dhikr is meant to be a shield because it protects us from all these aspects. The Prophet ﷺ, whose sins were forgiven, he used to do istighfar 100 times a day, right? So there's wisdom behind that. So some of those baseline adhkar are there, and we can engage in them. Some of the du'as are there. There's du'as of entering the bathroom, there's du'a of eating, there's du'a that we do after waking up, before going to sleep. Quran and recitation with some reflection, right? Listening with the heart, not just reading for the sake of reading, right? Reflecting on it. So if you go attend Taraweeh, come back and see, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say here, and what does that mean for me? I was mentioning Muhammad Iqbal earlier. One of his famous line of poetry, he says that until the Quran is revealed unto your heart, no one with any tafsir can open its secrets unto you. Meaning, you have to experience that revelation for yourself. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to tell me right now? That's protecting the heart. And as I said earlier, salah, which gives us a structure and grounding throughout the day. When we're in salah, pretend you're in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Imagine that you're there. That gives us grounding. And then reorientation, right? Again, we're reorienting ourselves, our heart towards Allah, towards the reality of this dunya and nothing else. And then, as I mentioned earlier, don't engage in some of these behaviors: doom scrolling, compulsive checking, rumor. Maybe do scheduled news intake. Maybe only set a certain timer. In fact, you can even ask like AI to help you with this. To give you a news brief in the morning, right? That's a lot better than constantly checking it throughout the day. And instead of engaging in compulsive checking, it's purposeful. Like constantly going on the internet and doom scrolling. No, I'm going on the internet to do this, and that's all I'm doing. If I have to check my email, I'm going to just check my email. I'm not going to open another tab and go onto a news site, Al Jazeera, and start checking there as well. Instead of isolation, have stable routine and presence. Okay, as a Muslim, it's good to spend time alone, but also we are responsible for those around us, and those around us can also give us comfort and a sense of grounding as well. So that's something we need to be mindful of. Excessive reassurance seeking, whether you're doing it on WhatsApp, guys, is this going to end? Is there hope? Or asking someone else, are we safe? Are we safe? Can we do this? All that can be sometimes excessive. Instead of that, and sometimes that other people might not even like that. They might say, this person keeps asking me the same question 100 times. A more mindful, supportive connection that is more meaningful is what we're seeking. There's 2 more slides, inshallah. Staying ethically and relationally grounded, right? Making sure that we're not, feeling alone. We're giving support to others around us. We are also, seeking support from them as needed. Having counsel from those individuals who are wise, people who we can trust. If you know someone is anxious, you don't want to ask about, what the future holds for us, right? You want to ask someone who seems to have a more calming presence. Being a source of steadfastness for others, right? Responding with discipline and compassion, not with panic. Having routines in your life, the things that you used to do before, family routines especially, not panic-driven reactions, right? That's going to help, inshallah, stay ethically and relationally grounded for us. A person who compulsively checks news during social or political crisis, what happens to that individual? Their fear intensifies, their sleep will be affected, their body is constantly activated, they're no longer engaged in prayer in a meaningful way, their family is affected. A better response would be someone who has a scheduled intake, who does grounding, some breath work, goes out for a walk, is able to write down the thoughts that they're having. They can engage in dhikr and dua to reorient themselves. and can act in whatever sphere of responsibility that person has, and not something that is more chaotic for that. So again, just to kind of summarize, this is our last slide, just on time, that anxiety is part of us. It shouldn't surprise us. We live in an unstable world. I'm going to end with this, actually, a line of poetry from Allama Iqbal, which he mentions this wave. It's in Farsi. He says, "Sahile uftade guft, garche basi zistam, hiç ne malum shud ah ke man chistam." That there was once a coastline, and it was sitting and contemplating, and it's saying, "I exist here, but I don't know what the purpose of my life is. Like, why am I even here?" And then he says, "Mawj khud rafta hi tiz kharamid guft." And at that time, as he was thinking, a wave comes and hits it with this powerful motion and force, and it says, "Hasta magar miravam gar narvam nistam," that I exist only in my motion, only in movement. If I didn't move, I didn't exist. So part of our existence in this dunya is this movement, is this constant instability, for the lack of better words, instability. So it shouldn't surprise us. And then distress does not mean you have a bad faith. And our response has to be, a multi-pronged. Just like the problem is multi-pronged, our response has to be multi-pronged. We need to approach it in a meaningful way. And if it gets out of hand, don't hesitate to seek professional help. I know Qatar has a helpline, for example. Some of the people who are joining might be students. Their universities offer counseling centers. Reach out, go to the hospital, make an appointment with a doctor, whatever requires, whatever it is that you need, do it. And try not to seek help from someone who's not going to be able to help you. Seeking help from AI sometimes can be helpful, sometimes not. Going online, reading articles can sometimes be helpful. Asking random people can sometimes be helpful. Go to someone who has knowledge, okay? And you're more than happy to email me if you like. My email's on the HBKU website. Of course, I can't offer professional services, but maybe I can guide you towards some direction, inshallah. And at the end, make dua for everyone, make dua for those who are protecting us, make dua that Allah guides those who are causing harm in this dunya. I will, inshallah, end with that. Jazakumullah khair.
وإياك بارك الله فيكم حياكم الله. Dr. Fahad, thank you very much, Dr. Fahad, for that truly insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We really appreciate the depth, clarity, and wisdom you brought to this discussion. Your reflections beautifully highlighted the connection between psychological understanding and spiritual grounding. And I'm sure many of us found your words both meaningful and reassuring, inshallah, especially in a time when so many people are experiencing anxiety and emotional distress due to the current global situation. We're very grateful for the time and knowledge you shared with us today. Jazakumullah khairan. At this point, inshallah, we'll be moving into a short Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll try to address a few of them. We'll be keeping the Q&A very brief so that we can conclude the webinar exactly on time, inshallah. We're having about 10 more minutes, right? So inshallah, I'm already seeing a few questions in the chat. Maybe I can choose the first one and I'll read it out to Dr. Fahad, inshallah. Is that all right, Dr. Fahad?
Oh yeah, of course. Whatever you like. You're the host.
Barakallah fi. The first question that I'm seeing here is how to deal with anxiety related to lack of preparation, whether it's in preparing for an electricity cut, water shortage, or stopped flights.
Mm-hmm.
Example, leave now or wait.
Example, what did you say at the end?
It's basically written, example, leave now or wait.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to preparing for the worst, right? We think about what's the possibility, different possibilities that can happen. Unfortunately, or maybe you can say fortunately, because if we think about the possibility right now, right? Like if we're living in Qatar, we're imagining, okay, what if the electricity gets cut off, the water gets cut off? What if the borders close? What if we have a shortage of food? What's going to happen? There are so many things that we cannot control all of it. We have no control over every single aspect. So at some point, you're going to hit a limit, right? You might say, okay, I'm going to, store food. I'm going to store water. How many gallons of water can you store humanly possible? How do you know how long this war is going to go for, right? You might say, I'm storing water for a month. Is that sufficient? What if it goes for 2 months, right? Then what are you going to do after that 1 month? You might say, I'm storing food for, you might say, okay, I'm traveling, I'm leaving Qatar. And I'm not saying that it's not okay to do some of these things, Like when it comes to, keeping some things, there's a limit to what you should do, but that shouldn't be based off of the feeling, the emotion, the anxiety itself. That should be based on some rational thinking, some wise decision, some consultation with those who are wise, asking them, hey, what are you doing? Have you made a, and not someone who has anxiety, by the way. If you ask someone who's anxious, do you have a survival kit? They might say, yes, I've dug an underground bunker, and I have all these things that are ready, and emergency lights and solar panels and whatnot. Someone who's calm and wise, who can help and guide you and say, no, this is what I've done, and the rest is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a blessing, because we're so weak that we ultimately have to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our weakness takes us towards this tawakkul, and we have no choice but to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because ultimately He's the only one that can control everything, and we don't have control over everything.
Jazakumullah khairan wa barakallah fikum, Doctor. Another question in the chat. A lot of people today, because of them having to go through such depressive phases and anxiety and distress, they often rely on AI. So the question is, how to deal with people who are leaning towards AI for counseling?
So AI, as I mentioned earlier, can be a good source sometimes, but also can be problematic. The issue with AI is a lot of it depends on how the model is trained, who's controlling the data, how it engaged with you in the past. So my suggestion is that if you're just looking for a structured answer, for example, like I said, I mentioned earlier, you can go online and look up, how to engage in deep breathing, right? Use breath work to calm your body down. You can go on AI and type that in, like, what are some ways that I can engage in deep breathing? And it'll give you a good explanation. But if you find yourself returning back to it over and over and over again, if you find yourself finding comfort only in that AI relationship, which is that non-human relationship, that's when it becomes problematic. So if the goal is to find information in a very short way, or maybe verify some information, then that's fine. But if the goal is to have a alternative to, like, a psychotherapy, for example, physician, or human relationship, then that's where it becomes problematic. So I know it's not the most direct answer, but the answer is it depends on what's happening there. In most cases, if you find yourself checking it over and over again, anything, AI, social media, WhatsApp, asking people something over and over again, that's an anxiety-based behavior, and that should be avoided.
Jazakumullah khairan for the clarity. Doctor, another question in the chat from Sister Tamina. Regarding anxiety, why is there a stereotype towards anxiety that it's a result of low on taqwa and iman?
Why that exists, it's a hard to explain, because the thing is, look, there's some things that are natural, and what ends up happening, I'll give you another example, which might be more relatable. It is difficult for us to wake up for Fajr, right, to go and pray. That's a difficulty everyone experiences. It's very natural. Now, that's something that's very natural. Two things can happen, two extremes. One is sometimes we give it an excuse, we say it's natural, and so therefore, it's okay if I miss Fajr. And on the other hand, sometimes people start feeling guilty. Why can't I wake up for Fajr? Why can't I do it? Some people have sleeping problems, they can't wake up for Fajr. So in this case, it's very natural to lose that grounding when something happens, when there's an attack and you start to experience fear, and you're like, oh my God, something's going to happen. Someone might say, well, don't you have tawakkul? No, that's very natural, right? But so one can't be just like, oh, it's okay. Like, I'm just going to go walk outside. I'm just going to go visit the base, just to kind of see what's going on. Like, you can't have that extreme either. But on the other hand, you can't have extreme that I have to control everything and there's no tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. So, and there's no, like, way to have a middle ground that is very, like, centered, and that exists all the time. Our iman shifts throughout the day. Our tawakkul on Allah will shift. That's very natural. That's not something that's unnatural. Sometimes we feel like praying more, sometimes we don't feel like praying more, and that's fine. That's part of human existence. Sometimes we have to put more pressure on us to pray. Sometimes it comes very naturally. So for tawakkul, there's no, like, one place that tell you this is what's going to define that healthy thing for you. You're going to go back and forth between, having guilt, between having lack of tawakkul, or between having sufficient tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's fine. Allah knows your intention. Allah is the one who's aware of it. So those things are not, what I said earlier, they're not mutually mutually exclusive. Like they can coexist at the same time.
طيب, inshallah. جزاكم الله خير.
Yeah.
One final question, due to the lack of time. There are quite a lot of questions in the chat, but inshallah, maybe at a later time, we'll engage with them. But one specific question from the chat, Doctor, final one. How do you deal with anxiety from toxic relationship, be it work or personal, especially when you have limited choice and their trigger is beyond your control?
Okay, so there's a few things here. One is the categorizing a relationship toxic. Sometimes some relationships are meant to push us, are meant to make us stronger, right? I mentioned marriage earlier, and I mentioned different stages of marriage. Marriage reaches a certain stage when the husband and wife will have conflict with one another. That's very natural and normal. That doesn't mean that they've become toxic towards one another. So the first thing that the person needs to assess is this relationship there to keep me grounded, to keep me. Someone is also asking about procrastination, for example, right? If we have pressure, we engage in activities. If we don't have pressure, human beings naturally, our animalistic self will take over and we'll become lazy, right? So if there's a boss there who's constantly checking on us, a boss who's constantly making sure that we're on track, maybe that exists because it's meant to keep us on track, right? Maybe there's a purpose behind it. Maybe it's not the us calling it toxic, for example. It could be something that we're assuming maybe it's not meant to be toxic. That's the first thing to assess it. Is it actually toxic? Then the other thing is, if the person objectively seems like an individual who is unhealthy for you, is to then be able to have some kind of a healthy boundary between you and them, right? Now, when it comes to work relationships, we're not talking about like silatul rahim here. We're not talking about your parents or your spouse or children or your siblings. We're talking about people that you can have some kind of boundary with, and it's okay to have that boundary. But if it's something that is part of your blood relationship, then you have to be mindful, because part of our relationship requires us to engage with those individuals, even though they're unhealthy at times. Accepting them as unhealthy as well is required, because we're in this relationship, which is symbiotic. It's not meant to be good all the time. A relationship doesn't mean that someone makes you feel good all the time. A work is supposed to make you feel challenged at times. I think you're muted. I don't know if you're talking. Oh, there you are.
Yes. Jazakumullah khair, and thank you very much, Dr. Fahad. Before we conclude, I would like to share a brief announcement with everyone. It's a good news, alhamdulillah. Admissions are currently open for the MA in
Okay, I don't know if it's my internet or something's not working right now.
Wafi, your voice is not good.
It's Wafi who got. Okay. Maybe I'll continue the announcement for him. I think he was talking about the admissions to the Masters of our MA program in Counseling Psychology, which is what I'm part of. So the admissions are open, and we encourage, if it's something that you find meaningful, a calling for you to engage in the clinical practice of psychotherapy, helping other individuals through their difficult time, which is very meaningful. I do it, as a profession. It can be very healthy. Obviously, I'm not trying to counsel myself or treat my own problems, but rather helping other individuals. Then I would encourage you to apply, inshallah. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my email is on the website. If you have any brief questions, I can't offer psychotherapy or professional help, but I can hopefully give some brief guidance. Feel free to reach out. Sorry, Wafi, I took over you because your internet was getting weaker. Okay. Well, if it's okay,
right on
Irshad,
time.
maybe we can end, inshallah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
No problem. So inshallah, we
Excellent
make
question.
dua that Allah allows us to feel. Allah allows us to become closer to Him. Allah strengthens us. We are weak and we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately, that connection is what's going to save us in this dunya through our anxieties and dealing with them, and also in the akhirah. and how ultimately whether we pass the test or not. So سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.